had the public consultation period. And after this, the consultation, the comments were worked into the documents before they were adopted by VED. They were again run through a validation process with a third party validator to make sure that it came up to the high standards that ICBCM, Pro accreditation that Vera has. And so what we wanted and what we believe that we have achieved is a methodology and the modules that are easy to use, plug and play, that can be used not only in the voluntary market, but can be adopted by any compliance standard that they come up with the highest standards. Because we do believe that we need to have convergence on standards. We want to arrive everyone doing the same way, because again, that means integrity for the market and the products that we're putting there. So this is a very exciting time. The actual methodology came out June. The modules for direct air capture, for CO2 transportation, and for CO2 storage and geologic storage are just were adopted 2 weeks ago, from October the 24th. So we're happy to take any questions after this. But that I will turn it back over to you, Katie.
I can do this. Thank you. I mean, it's hard to really grasp how significant this is. Like, this is a real game changer potentially of a protocol and an approach. Again, this modular approach, plug and play approach. I know there are many people on the stage who have slept a lot, not in recent, like we're talking recent months. That includes Colleen, again, the Deputy Secretary General for the CCS Plus Initiative, who has been organizing, facilitating the process from, again, perspectives, but through this whole kind of coalition, the CCS Plus group of 50 plus organizations, right, of all stripes. So maybe you could elaborate. So where William kind of ended here, elaborate on the governance of the initiative, what to look forward to, I guess, in 2025. Could new modules take shape? Has there been engagement with any governments to date? If so, what does that kind of look like? I think because you are, as I said, a geologist by training and go deep on the technical aspects. So if there are any, like, what were the biggest crunchy points, like the more technical, challenging, contentious areas where you really had to help overcome that with the group around the table, and then we'll come to Vera after that.
So thank you and good morning. So I work for Perspective Climate Group, which is a carbon consultant. And as William was just saying, we are basically on the side of Europe. We were part of the founding of this initiative. And we were working together at that time when we started with Northern Lights, which is in Norway and is going to receive CO2. They are completely ready now. So moment, I think their first project will come in a few months, but that's on the Norway side. And then on the other side, we had, I think it was William working also with Southpole, and that's how everybody came together. So we have 2 carbon consultants working on this to create the work, and then we, in Perspectives, we were responsible for everything related to carbon capture and storage. While on the other side, you had Southpole, who is working on carbon capture utilization and in long-term projects. So both sides, we are developing methodologies, and on our side, finally, also with the project developers that are currently active in the area, they really wanted to have this storage side in geological storage and capture ready first. So that's what we finally really. I think I have been, yes, working on the storage mainly because of my geological background, so that helps. So I've been also holding the pen and writing the words actually inside the document. And then on top of that, we have a small team that have been working also on the capture. As said, we have about 50 different stakeholders. Not all are interested in every single part of the different modules that we have written. So we had working groups of about, let's say, 5 to 10 people that we engage with, and they would give us technical backgrounds of everything that is needed within your project boundary, basically. If you are a capturer, we need to know which technology are you using, what is eligible the module. For example, we say that we don't allow for storage with enhanced oil recovery. That is something that we do not agree on. So this was some of the ideas that we have been finally also accepted with the working group. I think what I understand, and this comes back to you as well, William, and the working group on that, is that we had a very strong on embodied emissions, which is basically from construction. So the working group wanted to have an LCA approach. It was difficult to provide within Vera's framework because it was also within Vera's framework, it was said that you cannot amortize over time. So this means that for DAC developers, if they would put in the project emissions construction, they would have to subtract that from the baseline emission in the first year. And this for the DAC developer financially basically killing because they need the revenue to be able to get the projects going and to keep on working. Found a workaround. We are using LCA approach, but in a different way. So we are setting a materiality threshold, and this includes basically all the emissions that come outside of project emissions, and then we look at it if it's over the lifetime of the project. So that's not really a crediting period, but the lifetime of the project is going to be beneath 2%. Then it's accepted as going forward, and you don't need to have any other project emissions from that inside your, I would say, yearly monitoring. If it's over 2%, you will have to add a project emission. So that is something that you will have to do as a project developer through the LCA before you can actually start the work and do the verification of any project. Another big topic was biomass. We have had many discussions on biomass and the criteria for that. And this is where we saw a difference in geographies, because we are working with companies all over the globe. And the idea is that these modules are applicable all over the globe. And then you see that, for example, on traceability of it's not all well developed in some countries while it is in others. So in Europe, it's quite strong. And the project proponents that are in Europe, they are also really strong. It has to be like this, because otherwise comfortable enough. While on the other side in South America, for example, that is much more difficult to get the right certificates to be able to prove, it is sustainable. So in that way, we had quite a long discussion, and I think Vera at developing their own biomass criteria, but they will use our work and work from there. So we have to see if we have to adapt within the modules, but that will come in ongoing, basically. So I think you also asked if there was interest outside of, and if what we are going to do next.
I think that's really important. And I recognize that a lot of this is nascent still, the discussions with government, but it's also a perfect segue for then what hopefully Mandy will get into about just the engagements with some of the government on adopting what already exists in the voluntary.
Yeah. So then with regards to that, we have had, I think Vera has had contact with the government of Alberta in Canada that are interested to adopt one of our tools, because we are also providing tools to be able, for example, to identify reductions versus going further than just removals, and also you use shared infrastructure, because if and especially with, for example, Northern Lights, where I have done more experience with, they will receive more than one CO2 stream. So then you will need to know exactly how much this is and proportionally be able to allocate the right project emissions to every project. So you need a special tool for that as well. And I think Alberta has very much interest in that. We are in the CRCF, which is the European Carbon Removal Certification Framework, where we are trying also to get ducks and VEX their, I would say, methodologies. Then on top of that, there's another European government that is interested to look at our methodologies and use it as a foundation to work and build on that. So we have that ambition. We want to go further. We have, when we started the initiative, we have also said that we would like to public good so that others can use it as well. So we hope that we can continue on this journey.
Thank you, Pauline. If you don't mind just using a cooperative approach. Oh gosh. Carbon joke. So I shout out to Ian Cora, who hopefully is fast asleep right now, and he's Alberta based, and he played a big role with this protocol well before Mandy took over as CEO of Vera. So Mandy inherited a number of things when you came into the role a couple of months ago now, literally, like 3 months. But one of those things was already quite a mature process with the CCS plus. So I think Mandy asking, we not necessarily to go deep and others to go a bit deeper on the technical aspects, but just where Vera is in prioritizing even tech removals, right? How important it is, also this modular approach, right? How it is kind of unique and hopefully a model. And as I said earlier, well, meta standards, it would be very helpful for this audience to see where Vera is or positioning itself with some of the meta standards, particularly probably ICBCM is of interest. And then just the engagement that I know you are very actively involved with certain governments, right? And as I said, adopting or adapting what Vera or the BCM has born, essentially.
Thanks, Katie, and good morning, everybody. So I think for me, it's very interesting because I've been involved in the carbon markets area and in negotiating carbon markets for a million years. And we were never able to talk about CCS. I remember arguing for CCS and CDM many, many years ago when I was a negotiator in South Africa. Never got accepted. And I come from the electricity industry initially. And, you know, when we were designing, and I know this is going to be hard to hear, we're designing new coal plants in South Africa many years ago. And we were looking at CCS designs and engineering designs. It seemed like such a mammoth uphill battle to do it. And everybody used to talk about, are you ready? And all that meant was CNI tie-ins. There wasn't much more we could do. And, you know, what would you do with all of the emissions? Where would you store it? And that kind of thing. So to be sitting on a panel talking about the fact that we're actually this far ahead of all of the, you know, what William was saying, we're so close with depth, we're so close with all of the work that Pauline was talking about. It's actually quite amazing. And so I know I need to address your question. So I'm just talking about the context and the history of getting where we are now. So important. So when we look at what William has already said, what IA is saying, what RPCC reports are saying, is we cannot get to net zero and we cannot get to our Paris goals without removal technologies. And so when we as Vera look at removals and we look at what is in our toolbox, there's no ore, there's no forest ore tech CDR. We need all of it. We need all of the tools that are in our toolbox in order to get those emissions down. I mean, we're trying to solve for emissions reductions. We're trying to solve for decarbonization, but in the ecosystem, we don't just solve for that. We also solve for environmental diversity, social impact, ensuring that we're impeding on community development. And so a lot of the way the methodologies are developed, when we talk about integrity, we mean all of those things. And so I think from working with governments, that is why it's so important to understand that the methodologies and the work that we do, the integrity standard that we want to is also based on what different countries are telling us, what we're seeing in the different standards and the core ICBC, and it's meeting all of those things. And one of the other things that's interesting, the VCM started, Vera started 17 years ago. But we were waiting for the carbon market negotiations to complete. And like I said, I was involved in that, and we're still waiting, right? So it's 17 years later. But what has happened over time is that we've seen a VCM where we actually have such high quality and high integrity guardrails that when people talk about is there a convergence between compliance and markets, I say we're already in it. There's no if there'll be a convergence. Be in a convergence, because when I talk to the Article 6 negotiators, my previous life, a lot of colleagues, I say to them, there's no point. We have methodologies in the VCM. We have the VCS, which is a program of methodologies that you could adopt into 6.4, into 6.2 for governments to use. Of course, there'll be tweaks that will be required depending on the region you're in. And that is what we're working with governments on, is what are the tweaks that would be required to meet national standards, to meet your, what do you need to put into your regulations and your policies to enable carbon markets, but enable carbon markets that talk to national circumstances. And that is why this modular approach is so important, is because I'm going to use a cliche, there is no one size fits all. When you look at any methodology, for example, we're having discussions with Indian farmers, for example, on some of our agricultural methodologies. What we apply in Colombia cannot be applied in states. In fact, what you apply in one state in India can't be applied in other states in India. So when I think about CCS methodologies and the DAC work, the modules apply in Alberta cannot necessarily be applied in South Africa, China, India. So being able to collaborate with others in terms of the hubs for storage and is an extremely important part of this development. Pauline and William already spoke to the high standards, the high integrity, the checks that are in place, and that is, that's not debatable. That's something that's absolutely required. So I do think we're seeing the importance of all of these things coming together. I think the meta standards at ICBCM play an important role, because they give you that guardrails, the safeguards, and the things that you have to make sure you're meeting. For the methodologies, the standards that we develop in this ecosystem are of the highest integrity and the highest quality. All of these things converging and coming together now is important for the ultimate of scaling the carbon market. And why? Is to get finances that need it to meet these decarbonization goals we pursue.
One other thing while you have the mic, and just so we're on the same page, with Porcian, phase 1 has been, I think it's official now. It wasn't pro. So then credits generated through the CCS Plus framework, Vera, credits generated potentially could be used for CCS phase 1 lines. Is that correct?
Potentially. So we've got COSIA approval for our VCS program. There will be exclusions. Those are the kinds we need to get to COSIA. But overall, given the approval for overall VCS program, that is definitely on the table. So, hopefully, because the VCS program needs a specific quality and integrity, we've been approved, but we would have to get to the details of COSIA to understand methodologies or programs are included as well.
Andy, so you have a mic. Can you pass it to Paul, or Paul just grab that one and put it on, and let's hope we don't have any IT gremlins. Okay, so Andy actually just reminded me, we first met in Durban, and it was the CC modalities and procedures. and we got it, yay, and then it was never used. CDM, certified emission reductions, were 2 cents. Paul has been in the space for a very, very long time. Again, many of us have been, and so we have dug into the CCS Plus protocol, but also with AIDA and just other, clients and organizations you work with, you have done a relatively fresh review of all the existing major protocols and methodologies, including, I see Tim at the back now, IAGHG, but all the protocols and methodologies that currently exist for crediting for geostorage, and that includes with some DAC considerations, and that's voluntary and compliance based, right? And then looking at the former CDM goal, why don't you share just an update level? Don't get to it, but high level in some of that comparative analysis that you've done and stuff.
Well, thanks, Katie. Yeah, I've been working on this probably just slightly under the million years of Mandy's been in space. So, but I remember I wanted to actually turn the clock back a bit further from my start point here, because I remember 2003 in the very first monitoring reporting guidelines under the EU ETS, we had this amazing section 2.3.2.1.2 or something, which stuck in my head, asks for CCS guidelines to be recommended by members. Know that under Article 24 of the legal framework for the ETS, you can opt in gases, sectors, or you can bring in projects. Under 24A to bring in project-based systems. And we had a long discussion for several years. Should we do this on a project basis? Shall we do this on a different basis? And in the end, we went for the installation by installation approach. So we have a modular approach inside EU emission trading scheme. But to say also that we did have and then had another 6 years on PM. And what this kind of tells us is this stuff ain't easy, right? It's complicated. And like Mandy said, we've been on this long journey. It's great to see that we are here today with CCS Plus. Also to note that, we've done our own work in IETA. We still think there's things to do in this space. So, we have a high through a dialogue process with members, with governments, with our standard setters in the IETA membership to say, what do we want to see? What makes a good quality credit for CCS and the CDR or engineered CDR? So these are really important sort of safeguards and guardrails that we put down. Building off of that, we also then produced a handbook that tried to map out all the good and best practices across the space and across the methodological space. So that's really a good, powerful resource. We haven't got it up to date with all the latest additions from CCS Plus, but there are some unevenness. But also, I think that's the point. We need to get sort of more convergence and more sharing of ideas, because I think there's kind of two things that probably could land on in terms of what's next for how do we take this modular approach forward. When we firstly look at it, trying to apply it, we don't have a framework for doing carbon removals in Europe right now. We have something happening with this removal certification thing that they're doing. But in the meantime, there are companies that want to move ahead with projects in Europe under the VCM. What we find is that some of these methodological features, like the buffer, like the regulatory requirements, like the risk assessment, is kind of butting up against the existing frameworks that we have in Europe for the storage of carbon as well. So we have this sort of double regulatory layer that we need to somehow find a way to work around and harmonize. So that's one side. On the flip side, we have another problem when we look to do these projects outside of jurisdictions that don't have that mature legal framework to operate in terms of setting those safeguards, getting the sort of the high level criteria that we want to see on projects that we've agreed is a good thing. So we need to think a little bit more about how the CCS Plus modules can fill in that gap where countries aren't ready, well, they don't have any regulatory frameworks. They're not ready to introduce one because I've tried a few of these in the past under donor projects. It's very hard to get this stuff on the legislative agenda of many countries. Often it needs primary legislation, it needs parliament time, and it's not easy to get that from the time from particularly in developing countries, it's just not a big enough priority area. So in the meantime, we need to think about how we're going to backfill that gap. And I think we can do it through being creative in terms of setting standards. I mean, it's challenging for someone like Vera to then say, well, are we a quasi-regulator in these countries? Not so easy position for you to be in, but I think we need a sensible dialogue around how that can happen as well to try and get things moving quicker. And I think, just to finish, we had a long discussion around CCS and CDM. We put a lot of parties put a lot of thought into bringing that document together in the modality procedures. It has a risk assessment framework. It has some ideas around safeguards and assurances. So we should actually be looking to lean on that as we move forward as well, not just trying to reinvent the wheel, but bringing some of that forward. Hand it over there back to Kate.
It's the appropriate backdrop to ask you. We all know about what happened earlier this week, the initial win around the methodologies and the removals standards, Article 6.4. So it's worth, just while you have the mic and being a part of the process, as long, my father always says, know your history, right? So knowing the history and how to leverage what's already come before, should that make things easier, more efficient, as the 6.4 SB looks at methodologies into 2025 on the removals piece? Obviously, I'm thinking about that as well. So, how are you gleaning what's occurring in these halls?
Yeah, that's a sensitive one to answer. Thanks, Katie. I'll try my best. I think, we did go through that process. I am surprised that we're not drawing upon it more, particularly in the Article 6.4 context. These are some of the same people who were involved in that process way back then. So it's a bit disappointing in that respect, because I think what we've landed on, the standard that the SBM, let's say, approved at the last meeting, and that's been approved by the CMA now, it's really relying on two pieces, the risk assessment and a buffer. And I think we have to ask ourselves, are we comfortable with that as a mechanism, and are our host countries comfortable with that as a mechanism? And I don't see that in the text, and I don't see that really landing right now. So I think we do need to go back to some of those higher safeguards that were put in under the CDM, because exactly there was where we tried to address that, and host countries were in the room having that conversation at the time. So I think maybe that's coming. I mean, I think the SBM has said, and parties have said, there's still a lot of work to do under this standard. So I think that might be the next stage. And I really think actually CCS Plus can provide a lot of useful cues in that process as well. So yeah, looking forward to seeing how this evolves. So it remains dynamic, even though we're making progress. So.
I couldn't agree more, and I wouldn't have been able to forgive myself if we didn't find time to address that during this panel session, right? I think it's really important to understand that context. And Pauline, before you have, but I think actually very quickly, Pauline, if you want to chime in, and then we'll go to David.
Yeah, this was related to this point, because what we are doing within CCS Plus is not only writing methodologies, but we are also trying to see how this can be taken up into Article 6, into the EU. So for that, we have written guides, and they are on our website of ccsplus.org, I think it is. And you can download them. They are open for everyone to read. And there we actually go into the details of Article 6.4. So this can help us as well of trying to get these methodologies inside Article 6. We did the same guide for the EU, and we did one for the US. So yeah, in further, ongoing work, we will try to update these guides with other regions that are active in the CCS Plus world.
I think you were churning out so much in the CCS Plus, and that was an awful lot of work as well. These to put it mildly, the country guidance. Also, okay, so good segue for David, US. We can circle back to that though. First of all, one of the best resourced, is that how I put it? Biggest methodological protocol development efforts ever. One of them.
Indeed. I think what is very unique about CCS Plus, how many stakeholders are taking part, the quality of the consulting team will be assembled for it. And just to make it fit, 1 digit more expensive is methodology than average methodology, which actually very substantial. And but I think it's very unique that this methodology from the inception concept the ecosystem where it's going to exist. So it's not created in a vacuum to address one single project, and but where it can be applied. Some of my fears, I only do this for 28 years now. So one of my fears is to see fragmentation. There are maybe 6, 7 major standards, and I understand there are about 35 emerging standards in carbon. That is not helpful because it's gonna be 40, 50 different MRV protocols, which you will have to respond. This all increases the cost. And because of 6.2, a lot of countries trying to create their own initiative, write their own methodology and throwing out what is existing, reinventing a wheel. This is all taking away capacity, all increasing the cost. These are the things which carbon doesn't really need and slows down deployment. So we were trying to address all of this, and as earlier was indicated, that the one way these solutions can become public domain. And we clearly decided from the beginning that migration that you pointed out, that voluntary markets and complex markets are washed together. So that this should be able to serve. I also see another thing, because these are probably some of the most expensive or highest value instruments out there as environmental attributes, and it can be applied in many, many ways, and hopefully can create bridges in the tribal world which we are in, you know, NBS, nature-based solution, technical solution. Well, the durability with some of these instruments can be a risk mitigation tool for nature-based solution. So they can coexist and enhance each other. And this is very, very important. And also, as I had to trade, until 4 years ago, I always probably said I traded every known instrument was in the carbon market. What I, for example, love about it, because of the modular approach, you will have instruments coming out of this methodology with different values, which can create a perfect basket with a single MRV process, which could be maybe a very interesting, very comfortable things when you put together a portfolio, or some people together portfolios that have high, very high profitability at the same time. So I think it's going to be a very usable solution and fast deployable. Also, I want to recognize William's effort and Vera's effort that issuance, when you come to these expensive instruments, having it done once a year can be very painful because it's a very capital intense business. Some of the removals to be developed, and to wait 1 year or maybe 18 months is a process to have your first instrument in hand and you can create value, it's too long. So now we're going to try to create a digitalized process and maybe have high frequency issuances, which could help businesses and can again help in the long run to have more deployment, i.e. lower cost in the long run. I think these are all very innovative approaches. And truly, the 50 stakeholders coming from all 5 continents. So it's truly very exciting collaboration.
And it wasn't just, to be clear, industry, private sector. You had advisory steer code, like there was NGOs, there was academia, there were big think tanks, right, that were around this table globally. I don't know, I can't recall future, maybe it's a tag team, but the future of CCS Plus, what should we expect? It's not like the sunsets now, so what, or does it? I mean,
I think all methodologies are living and breathing companies. If you go back on some of the early CDMs, well, now you are maybe on version 12 or version 13 and so on. So we have to make sure that this methodology comes out. We will be able to maintain it and adapt it to the future. And once the methodology is completed, there should be an advocacy how to use it, and that's going to be, I think, very important element, how to restructure it maybe as a formal entity and to collaborate with the groups who have a lot of experience. And this is the,
You don't like this one? Okay.
maybe you know the.
Hello.
Hello, hello.
Hello, hello.
What else?
They don't like.
Okay. No, I was just gonna say, and you mentioned Katie. The other members are involved in that. And there's a supervisor. That we have the OGCI in there. The zero emissions platform, Microa, responsible steel, the IFC. So not only this is the advisory group as well. So that's another one of the things that gives more credibility, I think, to the CCS plus and academic thing, something that was done right.
And I just would like to add from a technology standpoint is that now the DAC module is out, the transport and the storage, but that doesn't stop us to continue to create modules. So we are currently in validation with the BEX module, power and heat. There will be 2 tools that will come out. And then following that, we have to, if we are following your route, there is a slight change of governance that might come in. But still on the technical side, we are also going to develop modules for power plants that are actually based on fossil fuels. We are going to look at industrial modules, so basically cement, steel. We are looking into hydrogen, blue hydrogen. So there is still a lot that is going to come, including, as well as I said before, these regional guides that we're going to bring out to also help the regions to scale up or work with CCS in that.
Thanks. And just to add to the point that David was making, I think we do methodological updates. I always say as we learn better, we do better. So once you apply the methodology, there are things you find that you think, okay, maybe this doesn't work and that doesn't work. So we will be doing constant updates. Which I know irritates project developers a little, but it is getting to that point where the methodology is actually better and better. And so and also the module updates as well is extremely important given the different applications that we need. But I just also wanted to comment quickly on the 6.4. I think if you read the decision from Monday, which everyone was very excited about, it's actually just a noted decision. And, if you know the space, and when you get an email and somebody replies and says noted, we all know what that means, right? So the CMA noted the supervisory guidance on the standards for methodology and for the methodological guidance. So I think we must just take it from whence it comes. But what I do want us to do, and Paul made this point, is again, we've done all of this work under the CDM. We've done all of this work under CCS Plus. We really need to rally around and speak more to the supervisory body members that we know and governments that we know to say, how do we get these methodologies into that process? How do we get the SB to look at the methodologies that we've already developed? What are the tweaks required? I've read the methodological guidance and a lot of VCS, for example, puts into that. And then also all of the work, as Paul pointed out, that was done under the CDM is a lot of work. And, let's not just throw that out. And I think it's one of the things we could collectively do is speak to the governments and the supervisory body members that we know.
Let's try this again. And I'm going to come back to you. You are ultimately like true expert, not just obviously negotiator days, ESCOM days, then EDF, right? But just transition, equitable transition, power sector, right? Transitions that make sense, are affordable, keep rates down, right? But are still developing real verifiable reductions or removals across that sector. How, in that framing, based on your experience, does this CCS plus framework, right? Or just broadly the industrial engineered tech removals, how do you communicate that kind of in a way that there's broader uptake, embracing maybe from those that don't immediately feel like embracing.
It's very important to talk about what is it, what is the ill we're trying to cure? And when we were framing the Just Energy Transition Partnership as well, it was all about not just decarbonization, but decarbonization is key. But also at the same time, how do you meet the social needs? How do you solve for air quality? How do you solve for water availability, for biodiversity, all of those? And it seems like impossible, but it is possible to solve for all of this. And the framing is not that we're just looking at a technology that's just going to be needed for power generation or the oil and gas industries. What is going to help us solve for that just need over time? So there is a need to transition over time from fossils to cleaner technologies, and all of the studies tell us that we would need renewable technologies in order to do that. But we can't just do that transition without being cognizant of job losses, of the social impact. And so when you look at things like in the methodology that we've been developing on CCS Plus, we also talk about job creation. We also talk about how do you protect social growth and so economic growth and all of those. So those are all things that are important in the framing of this. That it's not just some hyperlimited technology out there, it's actually meeting all of those imperatives. And it is difficult to convey the narrative, but I think it's very important that we do convey the narrative, that we don't just focus on the technological aspects, but we talk about that broader dots that we are connecting in this whole process.
I'm going to try. Are there any questions, comments from the audience? We started a bit late, so we can go a bit later before we start losing people. Tim Dixon.
Thanks, Katie. And sorry I was late to this event, so I might have missed the answer to my question. And that's on the storage module. How does it deal with reversals for storage? And then a second question: have the CCS module been used yet on a real project?
That's a good question. I will try to answer it. First, the reversal is basically dealt with a risk management tool, which was actually developed by Vera, but in cooperation with CCS Plus, because I think we had some discussions on that. This was before the time I started on it. But it's still related to a buffer pool. So it's a non-permanent risk pool that has about 5 risk items that we have to identify. And that includes, for example, a governmental risk, how is everything regulated, a design risk, what are you using to be able to store? You can think about post-closure risk, is everything going to be financed, all these things. With that, you will get at the end, you get a percentage, and that percentage will be applied to the net removal. So that will be taken off after everything has been calculated. That will be stored in a buffer pool. And that will basically help for reversals. The thing is, and that is where probably nature-based is different from technical-based, if you have a leak from your reservoir, then everything will go. So this is something that the amount is really large. So the chance that it happens is very small, but when it goes, the volume will be large, but it shouldn't go. I've been doing geology for a long time, so I know that it shouldn't go, but there are people that are afraid of that. But yeah, that's the issue basically. What happens after with those credits, because you cannot sell them, they stay within the buffer pool. What happens after that, I don't think is completely known yet. So we have to identify that, because with nature, I think it might be different. But this one, if you have permanence after, let's say, 50 years, you would close it. You can do up to 42, I think. So you would close it. Then you would have the ability to basically release these credits if they have not been used. But then the vintage is high, but they're still the same quality because they're still removed. So this is something that still needs to be discussed, I guess, with FERA and with the other standards. I think William wants to.
Yeah, that's a great explanation on that one. On the the non-reversible risk tool, one of the things that was important to us is that it is risk-based because not all projects are the same. And one of the reasons that we chose geologic storage is because if the site selection is done properly, the risks are very, very low. And so that's reflected in the space. There are other tools that don't go into that amount of detail, project by project and how they are distinct. And I will say, as far as the geologic storage, it's one of the best ones out there. The monitoring is, we have probably 50 to 80 years of monitoring experience in underground reservoir for CO2. And the trapping forces, you have the more trapping forces, and there's multiple seals, there's multiple the solubility of the rock. Some of the rock, the CO2 begins to become mineralized from day one. That gets better and better. So that's one of the beauties of geologic storage, and so we're happy about the space.
We submitted it before. I want to make sure because not only you, Tim, there were a number of people that are in the crowd right now that were not here at the front end of the session to hear about just so reiterate Stratus, biggest stack, 500,000.
Okay.
Like just some of those, and then obviously like credit generation.
I will do that. Do you want to say one thing first?
Answering the second part of your question, that's what I wanted to do. We have a project here, Stratos, which is going to produce about 500,000 tons of attributes a year reductions. And very uniquely, with the development of the methodology, at the same time, the development of the PDD started to take place for this project. And what is also very unique about this project, that the first 5 years of its operation is forward pre-sold maybe 60–70% already. So there are customers who are ready to take deliveries as soon as possible. So I think that's one of the first applicability of the methodology. And William was leading the team who was writing the PDD together with our other consultant, Sansport. I will hand it over to him, but this is very important. We do not want to ignore the second part of your question. So it was very unique that the development of the methodology and the PDD almost parallel was being created.
One thing. Because we are doing the same on our side, but with another project proponent, and it really helped also develop the methodology. Because what you are writing conceptually in a methodology, in theory, might be really good, but in practice might not always work out. So in this way, we were able also to update the methodology in such a way that it could apply to the projects, but at the same time remained its environmental impact.
And Katie, yeah, for those that were late coming, one of the reasons that the 1.5 became involved as a charter member of a founding member of the CCS Plus initiative is because, and a lot of people don't know this, but in late 2022, we broke ground. And for the last 2 years, there's been construction undergoing of what will be the world's largest direct air capture plant in Texas in the United States. This plant will become operational the middle of next year. And so what we want is, and this is high quality, it's direct air capture paired up with secure geologic storage. There's no algorithm. We measure exactly how much we take out of the air through meters. We measure exactly how much we store underground through meters. We have verification. It's a very secure, transparent process. We wanted a methodology that reflects that same integrity, durability, and that's what we have worked on with CCS Plus to come up with this methodology and the modules that accompany it that can not only be used on our project, but are rigorous enough that can be used for any compliance market we think in the world.
Thank you. 500,000 tons a year, pre-sold.
500,000 tons a year, and that's really just the start. We have enough pore space for 30 million metric tons a year of storage. And we're designing the second plant already. It's not reached the final investment decision, but we've committed to build as many of these as the market is there for. So 100 and more.
Are there any final questions or comments from the audience?
The project of the kind of this facility we are. The methodology the same as the CCS or different things for the facility to enhance oil recovery. So to enhance oil recovery, not storage.
We have had discussions with that. I mean, our group of partners, they also include quite a few oil companies, I can say. However, we decided not to allow for that because the thing is that it will be tricky with regards to additionality, meaning that your project will probably by itself, while you are producing extra hydrocarbons, will therefore pay for itself, basically. So therefore, you do not need the extra income from carbon markets. So that's why we specifically say in the methodology that EOR is not allowed.
And carbon is a perception business. So we have to be really careful not to create the wrong perception. And we also have to listen to a lot of the concerns of the buyers, and they all echoed what Pauline just described. So this was all respected. And
Have it. Final word. So first of all, if you're here for the next session on independent crediting program, joint collaboration update, it's been rescheduled. So we have time. Oh, we have another question. So we have time, and also it's not happening.
It's not really a question. It's just for anyone that's interested in a really deep dive into Stratos, we have a session tomorrow morning, which Katie's also moderating at 10 o'clock. And there'll be David and William and myself, and we'll be showing some videos and flyovers of the plant, and we can talk through the actual plant consists of and go into a bit more detail.
So we can't, elephant in the room here. So first of all, CCS plus, modular approach, plug and play. It's obviously, hopefully the uptake will be broadly. But with the US and talking about the US and Stratus, we have to address it, right? Especially if you're about to break ground, 100,000 tons, hundreds, plural. The US pulls out of Paris potentially. What are you looking at? What is the concern? What is the possible solution? And really, it's not that I want it to be more call to arms, right? Or call to action about just how do you make sure that these high integrity removals generated in the US don't become stranded assets.
well, you just witnessed how somebody's being thrown under the train. It's fun. But I do not want to speculate the future. What I know, institutional history is always important. Through supporting DAX, that part of the IRA was a bipartisan measure. And that's the spirit we are looking forward to the future as well. And we have a lot of confidence from buyers who signed contracts just even a few weeks ago with us, who were fully aware of the dynamics of the dialogues around the plant, and they're still signing contracts with us. And some of them are public. We have major airlines around the world, from Japan, the UK. Our first client was, which we're very proud, Airbus Consortium, which is a public domain, but Toronto Dominion Bank, nothing to be a Canadian financial institution. So Amazon, Microsoft. So I think all of these companies looked at this risk when they committed very high value compared to carbon markets. It's funny when, people think about the size of the VCM, and I look at some of the value of these contracts we are signing, they're almost comparable to the entire size of the VCM. And we are not just the only one, but our fellow technology providers are signing major contracts even on higher price point than we are. So I think everybody sees the importance of it. And one key element of the value proposition which we're building this on is for the 45Q, which was approved under the first Trump administration. Let's remember that, and that's very important. But I just do not want to speculate.
Final word from you.
Just on that, so I think what we've seen is in the past, we've seen increased voluntary action, increased corporate action, progressive states. And I just want to make the point that it's a global carbon market. It doesn't depend on one region, one country. We see interest everywhere. But also an MSCI study showed that those corporates that are taking the most action to actually reduce their Scope 1, Scope 2 emissions are also those corporates that are investing the most in carbon markets. So I think we are going to see, I don't think there's going to be corporate action that falls those companies that are progressive, that want to see a change, as David just pointed out, will continue to do that.
Yeah, for those of us who are around, we are still in 1.0, now it's 2.0, and you can see them doubling down. Also subnationals doubling down on compliance, right? Okay, final point.
So I was doing carbon when President Bush II decided to pull from the market. I was doing carbon in 2016 when I just arrived to a new job in be a chief system officer of a large utility, and went to Marrakesh, and we found out that there's going to be another pull out of the US. And 8 years later, we are here again. We are still here. We're still in it. We try to
So
find a
we
way.
have all confirmed now that we are a resilient bunch and we're old.
Yeah, that's part true. But this is the Rubik's Cube, and we just have to keep twisting it.
Remember, you can't spell success without CCUS. All right, with that opening session in the morning, I hope you're all wide awake. Thank you so much, all of you. So Paul, David, Pauline, Mandy, William, you're going to be floating around this session. There's going to be a lot of CDR CCUS stuff in the pavilion here today. And as I said earlier, if you're here for the next session in the program, independent accrediting program, it's not canceled. So this space is going to be open. You can network a little bit for the next hour or so. Okay. Thank you so much, guys. Bye.